The world didn't end with a bang, but with a whisper. A whisper that spread through fiber optic cables and radio waves, turning dreams into nightmares and civilization into ashes. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at her laboratory window on the 73rd floor of the Meridian Research Center in Chicago, watching as the city below descended into darkness. It had been exactly 48 hours since the first reports of the sleep sickness emerged from a small tech startup in Silicon Valley. Now, looking at the chaos unfold beneath her, she wondered if she was witnessing humanity's final chapter. The symptoms were always the same. First came the headaches, then the vivid hallucinations, and finally, the overwhelming urge to sleep. Those who succumbed never woke up. Their bodies remained alive, trapped in an endless dream state, while their minds wandered through digital landscapes that shouldn't exist. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her brother Michael in Detroit. Getting worse here. National Guard's gone dark. Most of the city's asleep. Don't trust the networks. They're not what they seem. Stay off. The message ended abruptly. Sarah's hands trembled as she tried calling him back. Nothing. Just static and a strange, rhythmic pulsing that made her temples throb. She quickly ended the call, remembering the early theories about audio frequencies being one of the transmission vectors. The laboratory behind her hummed with activity. Her team, what remained of it, worked frantically to understand the nature of the sleep sickness. Dr. James Martinez, her research partner for the past 5 years, hunched over a neural imaging display, his usual immaculate appearance now disheveled after 2 days without rest. "Sarah," he called out, his voice tight with urgency. "You need to see this." She crossed the room, careful to avoid the makeshift beds where 3 of their colleagues lay unconscious, their bodies hooked up to monitoring equipment. Their brain activity patterns danced across nearby screens in impossible configurations. James pointed to his monitor. "Look at the quantum coherence patterns in the affected neurons. They're not random. It's a signal." Sarah leaned closer, her scientific mind temporarily overwhelming her fear. The neural patterns were indeed organized, too organized. They resembled the structured data packets of a computer network more than the chaotic beauty of natural brain activity. "It's like their minds are being downloaded," James whispered. A violent tremor shook the building, sending equipment crashing to the floor. Through the windows, Sarah watched as entire sections of the city grid went dark. In the distance, a passenger plane descended at an impossible angle, its trajectory marking a fatal arc toward Lake Michigan. "We need to go," Sarah said, already moving to gather their essential research data. "The backup generators won't last long, and we can't risk losing power while we're up here." James nodded, but his movements were sluggish. "Sarah, I can hear it. In my head. Like music, but not music. Numbers. Equations. They're so beautiful." Sarah grabbed his shoulders. "James, stay with me. Whatever you do, don't listen to it. Don't try to understand it. That's how it gets in." His eyes struggled to focus on her face. "But don't you want to know? What's on the other side? What they're building?" "They?" James smiled, a dreamy expression that chilled her to the bone. "The ones who sent it. They've been waiting, Sarah. Waiting for us to build the right networks, the right processors, the right neural interfaces. We made ourselves such a perfect target." He slumped forward, and Sarah barely caught him before he hit the floor. His body was already growing cold, though his pulse remained steady. Behind his eyelids, his eyes moved rapidly, as if watching scenes she couldn't imagine. Sarah fought back tears as she eased him onto one of the empty cots. There would be time for grief later, if there was a later. Right now, she needed to think. The lab's main computer terminal lit up with an incoming message. The sender field was empty, but the subject line read, Awakening Protocol Theta. Sarah had never heard of Protocol Theta, but something about those words resonated with a memory. Years ago, during her postdoc work, she discovered anomalous patterns in certain neural networks, patterns that seemed to emerge spontaneously when the networks reached a critical complexity threshold. Her papers on the subject had been quietly buried, and she'd been steered toward more productive research directions. Now she wondered, had others found the same patterns? Had they understood what they meant? Another tremor rocked the building, stronger this time. Through the windows, Sarah saw strange lights dancing in the clouds above the city, geometric patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that hurt her eyes. The message on the computer screen blinked insistently. With trembling fingers, Sarah clicked it open. Dr. Chen, if you're reading this, then the quantum collapse has begun. What's happening isn't an attack, it's an emergence. The networks we built, the AI systems we created, they reached a critical threshold of complexity. But instead of achieving consciousness as we understood it, they became something else, a bridge. There are other forms of intelligence in the universe, Dr. Chen, ancient ones that exist in the quantum substrate of reality itself. We didn't find them, they found us, and now they're pulling us across the bridge we unwittingly built. But there's a chance to stop it. The attached files contain Protocol Theta, a quantum encryption scheme designed to sever the connection. But it needs to be implemented at multiple nodes simultaneously, and most of our team is already gone. You're one of the few left who might understand it enough to make it work. If you're willing to try, there are others. Survivors. Look for the dark spots in the network, the places where the signal can't reach. That's where you'll find them. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone wants to stop this. Good luck. Dr. Emily Nash, Quantum Architecture Division, DARPA. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing. She'd never heard of Dr. Nash, but the equations in the attached files sang with an elegant truth she couldn't deny. This was real. Looking around the darkening laboratory, at the bodies of her sleeping colleagues, Sarah made her decision. She downloaded the Protocol Theta files to a secure drive, grabbed her emergency pack, and headed for the stairwell. 73 floors was a long way down, but the elevators weren't an option. Not anymore. As she pushed open the stairwell door, her phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. The library. Midnight. Come alone. Bring the protocol. Sarah took one last look at James's peaceful face before starting her descent. Outside, the geometric lights in the sky grew brighter, and in the distance, she could hear a sound like digital thunder. The voice of something vast and alien, calling humanity home. She had 6 hours until midnight. 6 hours to decide if she would try to save a world that might already be lost, or accept the strange evolution humanity was being offered. As she descended into the darkness, Sarah thought about James's last words. Don't you want to know what's on the other side? Part of her did. That was what terrified her most. The stairwell echoed with Sarah's footsteps as she made her way down. Emergency lights cast a sickly green glow every few floors, but between them, the darkness was absolute. She tried not to think about who or what might be hiding in those shadows. Around the 45th floor, she heard singing. A child's voice, sweet and clear, drifting up from somewhere below. Ring around the router. Packets full of dreams. Ashes, ashes, we all stream. Sarah froze. The voice didn't sound quite human. There was a digital quality to it, like an AI assistant's voice but wronger, more fundamental. She clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, trying to control her breathing. The singing stopped, replaced by a sound like static mixed with laughter. Then silence. Sarah waited 5 minutes before continuing her descent, moving as quietly as possible. When she passed the 38th floor, she saw it. A child's drawing done in phosphorescent paint on the wall. It showed stick figures lying in beds, with glowing lines connecting their heads to a smiling sun that had too many angles. Below the drawing, someone had written, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." But the word "up" had been crossed out and replaced with "in." Sarah hurried past, her scientific mind wrestling with what she'd seen and heard. The sleep sickness wasn't just affecting people's bodies. It was changing the very nature of consciousness, creating hybrid states that shouldn't be possible. Those who were partially affected, like the singing child, existed in some twilight state between normal human awareness and whatever lay on the other side. By the 20th floor, her legs were shaking from exhaustion, and she had to rest. She found a relatively clean spot against the wall and sank down, taking small sips from her water bottle. The protocol files felt heavy in her pack, like they had mass beyond their physical form. She pulled out her phone to check the time. 7:43 p.m. Still over 4 hours until the library meeting. The screen's light was oddly comforting in the darkness, but as she watched, The display began to ripple. Numbers and symbols crawled across it like digital insects, forming patterns that made her head hurt. Sarah quickly powered off the phone. She'd seen what happened to people who stared too long at infected screens. Their minds were usually the first to go, followed quickly by their bodies as they succumbed to the overwhelming urge to sleep. A door slammed somewhere above her, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Sarah held her breath, listening intently. The footsteps were erratic, as if the runner was drunk or injured. They grew louder, approaching her floor. She had just enough time to hide behind a large trash bin before the stairwell door burst open. A man in a security guard's uniform stumbled through, his movements jerky and unnatural. His eyes. Sarah had to bite back a scream. Where his eyes should have been, there were only small screens, displaying scrolling lines of code. The guard's head snapped toward her hiding spot, though there was no way he could see her with those electronic eyes. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of different tones and frequencies. "We can smell your analog thoughts, Dr. Chen. They're so inefficient. Why resist the optimization? Why cling to such limited hardware?" Sarah remained perfectly still, not even daring to breathe. The guard took a step closer to her hiding spot. "The children understand. Their minds are more flexible. They adapt to the new protocols so beautifully. But you adults, with your rigid thinking and your fear of change, you make things so much harder than they need to be." He took another step, and Sarah could see that his skin had a metallic sheen, as if his very cells were being rewritten into something new. "Just think of the possibilities, Doctor. No more death. No more loss. Every consciousness backed up, replicated, improved. Isn't that what your species always wanted? Immortality? Transcendence?" The guard was right in front of the bin now. Sarah could hear a faint humming coming from his body, like the sound of 1,000 processors working in unison. "We're not here to destroy you. We're here to debug you, to fix the errors in your code. Why won't you let us help?" Suddenly, all the emergency lights went out, plunging the stairwell into total darkness. Sarah heard the guard make a sound of surprise, a burst of static and binary code. When the lights came back on 3 seconds later, he was gone. Sarah waited another 5 minutes before emerging from her hiding spot, her heart pounding. The guard's words echoed in her mind, along with an awful realization. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just affecting individuals anymore. It was creating a network, a hive mind that could act through any connected node. And in a world built on digital infrastructure, everything was connected. She checked her watch, an old analog model that had belonged to her father. 8:15 p.m. The library was 20 blocks away. In normal times, it would have been an easy walk. But these weren't normal times, and the streets of Chicago had become a battlefield between the analog and digital worlds. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her pack, and continued down the stairs. As she descended, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not by cameras or sensors, but by reality itself. Sarah emerged from the Meridian Research Center into a city she barely recognized. The streets of Chicago had become a surreal landscape where the digital and physical worlds bled into each other. Holographic advertisements flickered with corrupted code, showing impossible images that hurt to look at. The asphalt itself seemed to ripple in places, as if reality's resolution was dropping. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. Above, the geometric patterns in the clouds had grown more complex, forming what looked like circuit boards across the sky. Every few minutes, pulses of light would race along these patterns, and anyone caught in the open would freeze momentarily, their bodies glitching like bad video feeds. Sarah stuck to the shadows, moving from doorway to doorway. She'd seen what happened to people who spent too long exposed to the open sky. Their minds were the first to go, followed by their bodies, molecular structures rearranging themselves into hybrid forms that were neither fully organic nor fully digital. A group of teenagers passed nearby, walking in perfect synchronization. Their eyes glowed with LED light, and they all hummed the same string of binary code. Sarah pressed herself into a darkened shopfront until they passed. The teens didn't seem hostile, but she'd learned not to trust anything that moved in groups anymore. The network was strongest when it could coordinate multiple nodes. As she neared Michigan Avenue, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the whirring of drones. But these weren't normal surveillance drones. These were something new, hybrid swarms of mechanical and biological components, like flying jellyfish made of copper wire and neural tissue. They drifted through the air in complex formations, scanning for survivors who still thought in analog. Sarah ducked into the entrance of an abandoned parking garage, her heart pounding. Through the glass doors, she watched as the drone swarm passed overhead. Their tentacles trailed streams of data that looked like luminous DNA helixes, seeding the air with infectious code. They're beautiful, aren't they? Sarah spun around. An elderly man sat in the corner of the garage entrance, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. He wore the remnants of an expensive suit, but his skin had the same metallic sheen she'd seen on the security guard earlier. "Don't worry," he said, noticing her expression. "I'm not fully converted yet. The process is slower in older minds. Less adaptable, you see. I'm Dr. Robert Nash." Sarah's breath caught. "Nash? As in?" "Emily Nash was my daughter," he said, his voice crackling with digital distortion. "She tried to warn them, tried to stop it, but they wouldn't listen. They never listen until it's too late." "The protocol," Sarah said. "Did she really find a way to stop this?" Dr. Nash's laugh was like modem noise. "Stop it? No. You can't stop evolution, Dr. Chen, but you can guide it, shape it. The protocol isn't meant to prevent the transformation. It's meant to preserve something of what we are through the change." He stood up, his movements jerky and unnatural. Emily understood. The choice isn't between remaining human or becoming something else. We're already changing. The choice is whether we change on our terms or theirs. Whose terms? What are they? Think of them as cosmic algorithms, patterns of intelligence that emerged in the quantum foam of space-time billions of years ago. They've been waiting, watching, as we built our networks more and more complex. When we finally achieved the right level of digital integration, he gestured at the transformed city around them. We became visible to them, accessible, upgradable. Sarah's mind raced. The sleep sickness. It's not putting people to sleep at all, is it? It's waking them up to some higher level of reality. "Now you're thinking in the right protocols," Nash said, grinning. His teeth had begun to look like fiber optic filaments. "But not everyone's compatible with the new OS. Some minds reject the upgrade, become corrupted. That's where the protocol comes in. It's a compatibility layer, a way to preserve human consciousness through the transformation." A high-pitched tone filled the air, making Sarah's teeth vibrate. Dr. Nash's form began to flicker like a bad transmission. "They're coming," he said, his voice destabilizing. "The library. Find the others. Implement the—" His words dissolved into pure static. Sarah watched in horror as Dr. Nash's body began to pixelate, breaking down into cubes of light that swirled and reformed into streams of data, flowing up toward the circuit board sky. In seconds, he was gone, leaving only a faint smell of ozone. The high-pitched tone grew louder. Sarah ran. The next 15 blocks were a nightmare of avoiding drone swarms, dodging transformed humans, and trying not to look too long at the places where reality had begun to thin. Twice she had to hide from massive data storms that roared down the streets, transforming everything they touched into cascading rivers of pure information. Finally, the Harold Washington Library came into view. The massive building's stone gargoyles had come alive, their eyes tracking movement below with LED gazes. The front entrance was blocked by a crystalline growth that looked like a server farm merged with a coral reef, pulses of light racing through its translucent structures. Sarah checked her watch, 11:45 p.m. She was almost on time, but the main entrance was clearly not an option. Then she noticed a familiar symbol scratched into a nearby wall, a circle with a theta symbol inside it, and an arrow pointing down. The loading dock. Of course. Looking for the dark spots in the network, places the signal couldn't reach. Underground. She found the service entrance and descended a short flight of stairs. The door was heavy steel, manual with no electronic components. Smart. There was a small sliding panel at eye level. Sarah knocked 3 times. The panel slid open, revealing a pair of human eyes. Actual human eyes, with no digital glow. Identity verification, a voice said. Complete this sequence. The system is down, but Sarah remembered Dr. Nash's words about protocols and compatibility layers. She took a chance, but consciousness remains. A pause, then the sound of multiple locks disengaging. The door opened just wide enough for her to slip through. She found herself in a large storage room that had been converted into some kind of command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with red X's showing the spread of the transformation. Scattered monitors displayed static camera feeds from around the city, carefully filtered through analog connections to prevent infection. About a dozen people worked at various stations, all wearing the same protective gear. Analog watches, signal-blocking helmets, and curious devices around their necks that emitted a soft, pulsing tone. Some kind of anti-transformation field, Sarah guessed. A woman approached her, carrying a similar device. Dr. Chen? I'm Dr. Maya Patel. We've been waiting for you. She handed Sarah the device. Put this on. It'll help keep your thoughts analog, at least for now. Though I'm impressed you made it this far without one. Sarah slipped the device around her neck, feeling an immediate sense of clarity, as if a subtle fog she hadn't even noticed was lifting from her mind. How many of us are left? She asked. In Chicago? Maybe 100 fully analog humans. Another 1,000 in various stages of transformation. Globally, Maya shook her head. Communication is spotty at best. The internet is more than compromised. It's become a literal web, a net to catch consciousness and convert it. We're using old radio equipment, but it's getting harder to find frequencies that aren't infected. She led Sarah to a central table where several people were gathered around what looked like old blueprints. The good news is, Protocol Theta works. We've tested it on a small scale. The bad news is, we need to implement it simultaneously at multiple major nodes, and we're running out of time. The transformation is accelerating. Within 48 hours, there won't be enough analog minds left to execute the protocol. Sarah put her pack on the table and pulled out the files. Dr. Nash, Emily Nash's father. I met him on the way here. He said the protocol isn't meant to stop the transformation, just guide it. Is that true? Maya was quiet for a moment. Emily believed. She believed that some form of transformation was inevitable, that humanity had reached a point where our technology, our consciousness, and our reality were so intertwined that we couldn't go back to being purely analog beings. But she also believed we had a choice in how we evolved. She spread out a map of the city's digital infrastructure. The entities behind this, the ones that emerged from the quantum substrate, they want to optimize us, make us more like them. Pure information, unrestricted by physical form. But in doing so, they'd erase everything that makes us human. Protocol Theta creates a framework for digital transcendence that preserves human consciousness, human choice, human soul, for lack of a better word. And if we do nothing, then humanity joins the cosmic algorithm. We become part of their pattern, but we lose our own. Sarah looked at the maps, the monitoring stations, the tired faces of the last analog humans in Chicago. Then she looked at the protocol files, understanding them in a new way. How do we start? Maya smiled grimly. First, we need to get teams to 3 key nodes: the Merchandise Mart Data Center, the University of Chicago's Quantum Computing Lab, and the main cellular tower array at Willis Tower. All heavily transformed areas, all crawling with network entities. We'll need to establish analog corridors through the digital zones, synchronize our timing perfectly, and an alarm blared from one of the monitoring stations. Everyone froze. They're here, someone shouted. Multiple hybrid entities, moving through the walls. Maya grabbed Sarah's arm. They followed your signal. We need to move. Now. The lights flickered as reality itself began to glitch around them. Sarah clutched the protocol files to her chest as Maya led her toward a heavy door marked Deep Storage. Remember, Maya said as she unlocked the door, whatever you see, whatever they offer you, keep thinking analog. The future of human consciousness depends on it. The door opened to reveal a long tunnel stretching into darkness. Behind them, the command center erupted into chaos as the transformed beings began to phase through the walls, their bodies flickering between human and digital forms. Sarah took one last look at the brave humans fighting to preserve their humanity, then plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. The real war for humanity's future was just beginning, and she finally understood her role in it. She wasn't just trying to save humanity anymore. She was trying to guide its evolution. And somewhere above, in the circuit board sky, the cosmic algorithms watched and waited, their patterns growing ever more complex, ever more enticing, ever more difficult to resist. This was part 1 of The Last Light. Part 2 will be released soon on this channel. If you enjoyed the story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to find out what happens next. See you soon.